trip to Kinuc. Astrotraveling. Let me push this up a little bit more.
Didn't Paul Newman go to Kenyon College?
He totally did.
Yeah.
He totally did. He's one of our some like superstars. I think most famous one. Allison Janney also went there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I love her.
Good morning, good evening. Please go.
Hola. No, we'll just do it like this because I want to show them.
He's just playing it. No, I'm gonna go. Okay.
No, guys, I don't know how
Okay, so we're gonna-
Yeah, no, there's water there.
Okay. I'm gonna get Oscar and we'll walk my face.
Sorry.
Adelante, adelante.
All right, y'all. We'll probably start in like, I'll put the timestamp in the description, but we'll probably start like probably around maybe like 5 minutes. So we'll just give everybody a chance to kind of come in and stuff. So a little bit about this. I found this event on Facebook, and basically it is Tomás talking about his trip to Kinuc, I think it's called, but it is an ancient Mayan ruin. I feel like my ears from that sweat. It is an ancient Mayan ruin that he actually went to, and he's going to be talking a little bit about his discoveries. So. Hey y'all, also I want to say that a part of this, I know I talked about, living on my North Node of Sagittarius line, as well as my MC line. I also have a Pluto line that runs through the place that I'm at in the Yucatan. So as a part of that, especially being a Pluto in Scorpio, this is where we talk about like uncovering hidden parts of like ancient knowledge, taboo, interest, things that are what we would call dead and then come back in afterlife and coming back alive. And also Mercury and Taurus, as we are also going through this transit, talking about the land, talking about like the ancient roots of things. And so that's another reason why I kind of wanted to show y'all or just invite y'all with me to this presentation as well. So if you're interested in just learning about like ancient history, that's some of the things that I will be talking about on my astrocartography journey, from the Mayans to the Aztecs to the Egyptians to the everywhere, because, I'm trying to go around the world. Well, I am going to be going around the world. So that's one of the things that I would like to do. So collaborations with astrologers, anthropologists, librarians, or just people that live in, different villages or speak the language. So really pulling all this out from like how we used to make things or how we made things or how we make things, the food, the language, the people, the culture, and, last but not least, one of my favorites, ancient knowledge and wisdom. Hello, Truth. What's going on? Welcome in, y'all. So I'll be sitting down during this presentation, but Tomás is about to come up and he'll be speaking more about his discoveries in Kinuc. Okay? So I just wanted to come on here and say, like, what is it? What are we sitting here for? What are we doing here? We're just getting ready he's getting ready for the presentation and everything like that. So, also, there's another thing that I wanted to kind of talk about, but I'll do it because I do have another video coming up with the Astro. Here he comes. So, I'm gonna go sit down, but I'll talk more about it afterwards.
Tomás, shall we begin?
Sure.
All right, we're going to broadcast this talk on our Facebook page and then upload to our YouTube channel. Muy bien. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to the Everyday English Library. It is a pleasure for us to see you today. Please welcome PhD Tomás Gallareta Cervera, who's going to talk about a trip to Kinuc and an archaeological zone. Please, adios.
Thank you very much for having me. My name is Tomás. I'm going to give you a quick talk about the archaeological site of Kinuc, which is located in Nevada. It's about 2 hours south here by Oshkosh. This is the site where I did my dissertation. So I'm going to be talking about a little bit of our excavations there and some of the interesting things that we've found. Before I started, I wanted just to say really quickly that part of the reason I'm giving this talk is because I am actually really grateful that a library like the English Library in Merida exists. Libraries typically in Mexico, in my experience, are very much about going and reading and researching and being really quiet. And then libraries like this are a lot about community building, which I think is very important, right? Community is extremely important for the happiness, for knowing people, for being exposed to diversity and all this stuff. So I'm really grateful that I got invited to give this talk. Okay, so really quickly, this is sort of like the roadmap of what I'm going to say. I'm going to talk a little bit about what archaeology is, to contextualize it. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Maya and the Kinuc region, the site of the week. Then I'm going to talk about, when we talk about the Maya, we always talk about kings and sites and really big cities. So at the site of Kinuc, a really interesting question is, was it a royal court or was it what I call a rural court? I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the difference of those is. And finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about the research that's been happening this summer and what's going to happen in the future, right? So what we have in general in Kinuc is in general, it's the site that has been, we have evidence of it being inhabited since 900 BC, all the way to about 950 AD. documented archaeological sites in the Mayan area, or the Kinuc area, and we really have a focus on excavations and documenting precisely where every rock is, and we draw it, we photograph it, we employ the latest technologies, all with the purpose of reconstructing. And if anybody else wants to research it, they can go back and see what we did, and they can be really critical about what we did, right? Which we think is not something that happens in all archaeological sites. We think that Kinuc in general is pretty unique about the way we do it. So before I get started, really quickly, they're really responsible for the archaeological site of Kinuc, and most of the research of the three PIs, they call them the three amigos. It's Bill Ringel, Tomás Gallareta Cervera, and George Wade III. Those guys have been, it's been 25 years since they've been research there. I did my research there since 2006, all the way to 2016. Then I got a job at Kinuc College, and then I moved to Belize. But the research is still going on, and I think it's safe to say that it's one of the most continuously studied archaeological site in the Yucatan Peninsula. And I'll talk more about their research. So a little bit, really quickly about me also. I'm Mexican. I come from an extremely redundant family, I like to say. My dad is an archaeologist, that's why we have the same name. My mom is an archaeologist. My wife is an archaeologist. My wife has a twin sister who's also an archaeologist. It's very redundant. And I did my dissertation here at Kinuc. I went to UNC Chapel Hill under Tricia McInerney. I did my BA here at the University of Yucatan. And then I now work at Kinuc College in Ohio, right, which is famous for Paul Newman went there, Allison Janney, it's a liberal arts college in the top of the mountain. But even though I went there now I work in Belize. I mean, at Kinuc we have been doing this for over 25 years. This site has been, researched and very much in a tedium, for saying something. So for example, this April we were in the SAAs in New Orleans celebrating the 25th year of excavating, quarter century of excavating the archaeological site, right? This is just part of the team of who we work with. So it's a very well-researched site, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a second. So let's start with talking about what is archaeology then, and what is an archaeological site. So an archaeology site is just whenever you find a clustering of artifacts, any evidence of human activity. It doesn't have to be something enormous, it can be something small. And it's people sometimes, it also doesn't have to be really old. Archaeology can be literally what happened yesterday, right? It's just the accumulation of artifacts that is man-made things that are able to tell you something about society. So our goal is to reconstruct human culture and activities from the material evidence that people leave behind. And if you think about it, human beings are one of the people that we leave so much behind. We just leave a trail of things behind us all the time. I have a 3.5 years old, and I have to literally pick up this archaeological remains like this morning twice, But us as human beings, I think we have trash, we have disposals, think about what we eat, what we do. We just leave a trail of things, and a lot of those things, well, they can last. We've all heard the diaper lasts 1,000 years, or things that are, buildings, all these little things. And so all those things are clues that we have that serve us to understand what people did in the past. So it could be really anything. So there could be mounds, it could be architecture, anything really related to human activity. So these are some examples. These are actually not from the archaeological site of Chachich, which is where I work now, but this is evidence of a post hole. This is evidence of this is a building, but this is a bench, and they have like graffiti written all these different things that can tell you about human activity. And sometimes we understand it, sometimes it's really hard. This is a wall that we found that has all this graffiti written into it, and this is what I saw. So this has to be someone that's a linguist who's going to analyze this. I see like a burning window or something, but I really have no idea what this is. It's not burning. But we find all these different things, and for the most, there are sometimes we find really spectacular things. But for the 99% of what we do, we find just trash, like ancient trash. We find trash that preserves. So we're talking about usually stone here and ceramics. If you go to the US, for example, and you talk about something that's from the colonial period, 200 years ago, you'll find nails, you'll find little pieces of spoons, glass, things like that. Here in the Mayan region, where we usually find our rocks and ceramic shards. Those are the things that you preserve. In the Kinuc region and here in Yucatan in general, as you probably know, the soil is very acid, so anything that's organic just doesn't preserve. It just eats it up. And the other thing is that in order for something to preserve, it needs to be in a constant environment. This is why the Colorado has a really good preservation, for example, right? Or Peru, that's really far up. You have like mummies, and you have people that are wearing their clothes still, right? Or hair, or the Himalayas and all that stuff. But in areas like the Amazon and the Ecuador and really the jungle, when anything goes, is really hot and it's really low, it's really cold, or it's like really wet and then really dry and whatnot, nothing really preserves. Right? So this is what we, so a lot of things that we have are like either rocks or ceramic materials that we have. But that being said, a lot of things can be said from this kind of architecture, from this kind of remains. You know, you can tell a lot from what we have. So in a second. And also I want to say just really quickly a note to how archaeology is getting really hard to do. Last year when we went to do archaeological research, we went to do a bunch of surveys, and we did this thing called ground truth, and we had this LiDAR material. And with this LiDAR, which is a way of doing a map, we had this map on a 3D scale, and we had to go and actually see that the features that the map told us were actually real and not just imaginations, because you know, ultimately they're pixels. So we went there, and it was like more than 100 degrees, 100% humidity. It was very hard. Like at that point, all of us except Claire got COVID. So that's my watch. My watch tells me my heartbeat, and that's my resting heartbeat, which is 150. It should be like 60 or 70. And if you can tell up there, at some point it was 141. So it was really hot. So it's not an easy task. We have to really go in the middle of the jungle. In Belize, there was a hurricane that dropped all the big trees. It was really easy to get lost and whatnot. So it's really hard. It's really hard work sometimes here in my area. All right. So the other thing that we try to understand as archaeologists is what is the site formation process. So how does archaeological sites form? There are cultural processes and there's natural processes of how the things that we see emerge, right? So there's cultural processes, which is the process of human behavior that affect and transform artifacts after their initial period of given activity, which is meaning that you extract something from nature and then you transform it into something, right? So now that's a cultural thing. And there's natural transforming events, which are toughonomic. There's earthquakes, hurricanes, whatnot. At Kinuc, this time that I went to the site, there's a lot of, they're not moles exactly, I forgot, tusas is what they call them. And they just excavate on the ground. Gophers. And they'll just yank all the ceramic materials all the way up. So then you'll have like reverse stratigraphy, like all the old things tend to be on the surface, the oldest things tend to be on the bottom, and the newest things will be at the top. And you have golfers that just go up and start yanking everything up. So you have to take all those things into consideration with your archaeology. So So in a nutshell, you find, this is what we find in general, you'll find really, and this is where archaeology is really magical to me, in the sense that you transform something, you create something out of nothing. It's a mound, it's literally nothing. But then you go in there with a bunch of guys, you clear everything out, you cut all the branches, you'll have something like this eventually, right? And then you excavate, you do trenches, you do all this kind of things, and then eventually you'll find stuff. You'll find walls, you'll find material culture, you'll find all these different things. There are virtually little windows in the ground in which you can try to reconstruct the present, right? You can, sorry, the past. You can try to reconstruct the past. There are little pieces of a puzzle. There's also, so for the most part, you find a lot of rock, especially in my area that I work, which is more like architecture. But sometimes you find little treasures, you can find pots somewhere, especially in my area, so you're one of the deposits. And ultimately what we want to do is, this is an example of a test pit, is we want to record exactly what we see. Again, this is a small sort of like vertical window. So what we did is we did a test pit, which is a 2x2 we typically do, and we go all the way down. And the idea is that that will give us a stratigraphic record of all the occupations that a site has. Sometimes you'll do a test pit and there'll be nothing, which is great. It's a lot of money that you just went there. But usually you'll have things like this, which is a series of 6 stucco floors, which is very typical in the Mayan area, right? In the Mayas, what they did is they'll fill up natural features with, first it's big rocks and small rocks and soil, and then they'll put stucco floor on top of it. And then when someone wants to remodel after a couple hundred years or 100 years or maybe less, the area, instead of dismantling everything, they'll just do the process again. They'll put more rocks, soil, and put another stucco floor, and so on and so on. So by that, we can tell the number of constructions, right? So in this case, in this particular test bed, there's one little, tiny little floor up there, and then we have one. These ones these two are really close, so sometimes you have to decide if it's a renovation of a floor, or it's 2 separate events. And then underneath all of this, there was like a small structure, and this is bedrock, so you can see that they fill up the bedrock, they leveled it, put a structure, they decided to remodel soil blocks, so this is probably a renovation, etc., etc. You're more than welcome to ask me any questions at any given point. We're a small group, it's fine, let's just make it a conversation. Yes?
Okay, so this picture is what was excavated in the mound that you originally, and did you just randomly pick a location?
Great
on
question.
this? Like you may have 100 feet and you say, I'm going to start digging here?
Great question. The reason that we do it is so, I don't want to be very cynical, but this is where I am in my career, is that archaeology is really expensive, and it's super time consuming. So it depends on your research question. So if you want to know, for example, if your research question, the answer you want is something that's to do with chronology, or the different construction phases of a site. I, for example, would do a 2x2 in the middle of the plaza, because that's in the middle of the site. Because that's probably going to tell you, probably, nothing in archaeology, there's nothing guaranteed. I'm going to tell you all the secrets. If I wanted to, for example, find out activity, or find things that I can analyze to tell me what people were doing, I don't know why, there must be a physics law about this, but I will just do the corners. People just have crap in their corners. I mean, I don't know why. Things accumulate in the corners all the time. If we go to our houses, that's where our trash cans are, that's where the dirty laundry is. So things literally accumulate for like 1,000 years sometimes. So again, it's not guaranteed, but I will go for the corners. And then the other rule of thumb is you go from what you know to what you don't know. So if there sometimes is like a little feature that you can see that's human-made, so say like an alignment of rocks or something, you can start there and just follow that alignment of rocks. That way you can, follow it and start looking at the shape of the building. Okay, this building is, I don't know, it looks like a temple. Okay, so my strategy for excavating changes and whatnot. So this particular one was one of those. This one was at the northwest of the plaza. We were trying to figure out the extension of the plaza and chronology. This is what we found, right? And the other thing that's important about archaeology is that every single one of those layers or those floors have objects inside them. And those objects can be dated relatively to a point in time, right? So usually it's ceramics, usually it's lithics and things like that. So with ceramics, which is very typical of what we use to do, it's called relative chronology, is you can have a range between, say, 400 and 600 AD, which this particular ceramic was constructed, and you find it in the film, right? It's trash, but it helps you date something. I mean, and it would be similar to, let's say that we make a hole here. I'm just making something up, but we'll find like an iPhone 10. And then we make it up, and then there's a floor. And then we go underneath the floor, and there's an iPhone 8. And then we go underneath that, and there's like one of those old phones that you have to like do the ring. And then before that, there's another. It's okay, you can't tell the exact date. You can tell more or less that this is not 1,000 years old. You can tell more or less that, this is, in the case of the iPhone, I guess it's decades. In the case of the other one, it's maybe 50 years and so on. It's the same idea. That's how we get the range and things like that. Yeah, of course. Okay, so one more thing to understand before we go into the Kinuc. And this is something I always like to think about. So this is a painting from Thomas Cole. It's called The Architect's Dream, and it displays all these works of art, and they're sort of like after the architect finishes, right? So you have all this sort of Gothic somewhere, and classical, and neoclassical, and whatnot. And it's great, and he calls it as being perfect. So the critique to this, especially when you study monumental architecture and archaeology, is that buildings, perfect in Latin just means that it's done. Something that's perfect is it's finished. And when we think about architecture and anything really, it's never finished. Nothing is ever finished. In fact, the norm is always in constant change. Buildings are always changing. Right? Things always change. I mean, we have, an architect may finish a building or a house, but then we're going to add stuff to it. And then 100 years later, we're going to add so much other stuff to it. I mean, there's houses in the center that are like 300 years old, colonial houses. And now they have glass and metal. We're always adding things. Buildings can have things that we call biographies, right? And you can know a lot about what societies are thinking from those changes in those buildings. So it's this incremental change that preserves the building, that makes it within the sphere of the culture. So this is from Kinuc. This is the site that I was actually going to tell you about. And you can see a series of renovations that are like floors, ramps, molded buildings, film, all those different things just in the corner. So it's incremental change that maintains the building alive. And one of the things that I study and that I want to convey to you is that, and this is a little bit out there because it's theory, but the idea that what I like to study is this thing called the Patricia Mechanical social speciation, which means that she argues that there's a point in which individuals start to appropriate the landscape, transform it into culture. So what they start to do is individuals start to appropriate things like buildings and palaces in a way that you can't really think of individuals without thinking in their architecture, in their palaces, in their residences. They become hybrids. And once they do that, they start to separate themselves from the common people, creating basically two different strats of people, right? The poor and the rich, or the powerful, the divine, and the normal people, and whatnot. That's what really interests me.
Excuse me, where is this image from?
This image is from a vase polychrome vessel. It's not from Kinuc, it's from the south. And about 90% or 95%, I would say, of all these rollouts are royal scenes. So what you have here is it's a king is talking to someone. This is his obsidian mirror. They have a scribe taking into account whatever. These are bags of things. I don't know exactly what they are. They can be corn, they can be just grain and whatnot. And he's writing down what happened. A couple of fans because it was pretty hot back there too. Blankets. And then what I like about this is that I don't exactly remember what it says. So these are the glyphs, but the scene appears to be a marriage scene. So here are the woman. There's a council. There's the guy who's negotiating. That's another guy who's negotiating. I mean, this guy who's negotiating is the groom. That's like trying to negotiate until the end, right? But the idea here is that complexity arrived from okay, so this is where we are. This is from Bill Ringel. This is basically a map of the density of archaeological sites that are in the Yucatan Peninsula and my area. And one of the things that Bill Ringel argues that is really interesting is that if you make a sort of like a density map of all the architecture and the structures in the Maya area, most of its density of vaulted buildings and corporate vaults and whatnot, stone buildings and stuff there, right? It's here, in the north of Yucatan. And part of it, and this is the Puc zone, because in the Puc zone here, the limestone is really old, which means it's really dense and it's really hard. So you'll have all this, and people from the Puc Maya were able to master those things. They're basically master craftsmen. Part of the economy depended on that. If you go to Belize, the limestone, the bedrock, it just becomes dust in your hand. It just, if you are digging and you hit bedrock here, there will be a clang, and literally your tool will bounce back. In other places like Belize, where the limestone is a lot older, it's not as dense, it would just turn to powder. So we have a lot of more stone buildings here. And this is what we're talking about in terms of chronology. What I'm going to talk to you about today goes all the way from the Middle Classic all the way to the Terminal Classic. But a lot of the cities were abandoned and depopulated to move into the coast, into the north of Yucatan and to the north of the peninsula. Yes?
Where is your site of
Kiwi? Oh, I'll tell you in the next slide.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no problem. So this is the site of Kiwi. This is right there in the Puc. So you have the Sierra de Ticul, then you have the Bolenchen district up there, which is full of hills, and you have the Santa Elena Valley in the middle that is basically powered or governed or overlooked by Uxmal, which is the biggest Puc site in the region, right? This map that you see here is the map that the Bolenchen Regional Archaeological Project, or BRAF, has been studying for 25 years. All this, we have data. They have data of all this area, and this is a trajectory project that was done by archaeologist Tomás Gallareta Cervera, where they basically walked all the way and registered everything they saw in the area. So this is the big sort of like area that they cover, which is a really big area. It's pretty well studied. Our site of Kiwi is over here in the middle, and the site of Kiwi has so it's located in the middle of the Bolenchen region. So one of the things that is really interesting about this site is that it's known for first of all it's known for its hills. What? Its hills, its rolling hills. Like the Yucatan is flat, but all this area is just full of rolling hills, which is unusual. It's also for its productive soils. Everything that grows there and grows there really well, even though there's a lot of dry season. It's stonework, it's ceramic tradition, and there's no water sources, and this is key. Because you have a lot of people that have been living here for 1,000 years but have no permanent water sources. There's no lakes, there's no rivers, there's no anything. So finding out and getting the water is a key thing in this area. A lot of the buildings that you see in the Montana region are imitating, a lot of the palaces or really big architectural houses are imitating the hills. A very famous quote by Dunning is called Lord of the Hills, and they really are the lords of the hills. They are really able to amass and imitate with their palaces all the landscapes. So there's an example from Soyil, right? This a palace is a huge hill represented there. They call it the Winston in Maya, right? A lot of the things a lot of the people there, it's an agriculture economy / urban, which means that about 60-70% of all their diet is corn. It's carbohydrate. Which, for example, one of the things that we see when people become sedentary is that they have a lot of cavities now. And that's because of carbohydrates like spaghetti and all those things. They're really sticky and they really stick to your teeth. It's hard to get them out. We have basically here, as all of us know, especially now, we don't really have autumn or winter. We basically have wet season and dry season, right? It's the same thing. And now we're waiting for the wet season. Like all that hot air at the night, that means that the rains are about to come. And that's why you sometimes see that the sky is gray. It's because everybody's just burning their fields because they're getting ready for the rains to come. So it's an interesting place. It's an interesting place to have gamble. When you go to the book, you'll have, so this is just another example of the really great architecture that we have. It's known for being geometric and abstract. And also it's known because those are examples of its really red productive soils, right? They call them patches. So you have all these mountains and then you have patches of really productive soils, right? It's really crazy. I mean, you also have patches where there's bedrock and then there'll be a tree just like yanked into the bedrock and going really fast. It's like this really incredible environment. The other thing that's really interesting is their cultural identity and their material culture. So opposite to other sites like Wuhan or Guatemala and all these places, they have a lot of polychromes, they have a lot of writing. In Kinuc, we don't have that. We don't have a lot of, or in the book, there is writing, there are dates, and a lot of, for example, the Uxmal has a couple of dates in the ball game. It has a ball court marker. Lamna has a bunch of dates too. But in general, there's not a lot of writing here. In the ceramics, where you typically see in polychromes, you see a lot of writings. We don't have it. So a lot of people kind of think that the book is kind of, people didn't really like the ceramics there because there's no writing system, there's no polychromy. Doesn't mean that they didn't know how to write, just means they're putting in their ceramics. But what it really is that this ceramic has a high technology ceramics that it's a particular style of ceramics. If you grab any of this ceramics, there's a ceramics that is called Tipu thin slate, for example. If any of you have done any ceramics in your life, it is this thing. And when you do this to it, you split it, it sounds like a rock. It's soft. So it's not really that people think that they're like behind the technology and whatnot. It's really that it's just this really solid rock technology, right? That is meant to keep water cool, it's meant to last. And a lot of the ceramics that we find are because they last forever. Another thing that is interesting about it is that what we have is that, again, because there's no permanent water sources, a lot of people, I'm sure you've heard this, they have this thing called chultuns. So chultuns are basically water cisterns or rain barrels that are on the ground. There's going to be a lot of water that's going to fall. They will pave the whole sort of like funnel around it, and every household, and a lot of the households that in the Puc have those really big sort of like water barrels that are able to store water through the dry season, right? And not only for water, Bruce Dallin, for example, would argue that they're also for fermenting, things and making corn beer and all that this stuff. This is one of the things that we look, for example, in archaeology. If there's a chultun, that's how we call the water barrier, the water cisterns, probably it's going to be a site or an area that's residential and not really ceremonial, for example. Another thing that the Kinuc is famous for is its lime production. So this is something that Ken Sellinson made. The map is by Bill Ringel. He found a lot of structures that were circular and also annular structures, and he concluded through that they were basically used to create lime. So what that means, lime is used for a lot of things. It's used for construction, it's used for disinfecting water, it's used for disinfecting when you do corn and you sort of like grind it, you need to put lime on it and to release all those nutrients from it, right? So lime is incredibly important in Mesoamerica, and the Kinuc apparently is full of people having quarries of lime, right? To do all these activities for the construction, drinking water, and all these different things. And Ken Sellinson did his dissertation on this. In fact, if you want to read about it, he talks about how much wood it would take to burn and create lime of all of this. It's a lot of wood, and he would do all these experiments to figure out and calculate how much he needed. So the book is really interesting place, and the research of Brad has really pointed out what it was to live back in the day there in its everyday life. Okay, so this is another map. So we're going now really into what Kinuc is. So that's again the Tushmal. This is Kinuc. If you want to get to Kinuc, you have to go to Ushmuskop and then go to Jashichen. There's a road that takes you to Kinuc. So we're there. This is what the site looks like. It's about 5 square kilometers. It's not a very good map. I don't know why it's like that, but basically, so what you need, this is what we're going to talk about. You see, this is another map that's a little bit more clear than that, but it's basically about 5 square kilometers of just structures that are sparsely inhabited by farmland, right? The hillside inhabitants. And we're going to talk about Jasche, which is where I did my dissertation.
How many structures?
Oh, there's dozens and dozens. There's plazas, there's patios, there's multiple vaulted buildings. So if you go to, okay, so this is just the main part. See how this is kind of like washed out, the projector's washing it out. But this is basically one of the groups. This is where I did my dissertation, right? So this is the pyramid. I'm just going to call it the pyramid because its name is N1065, 1825, and its coordinates, so it's not the pyramid. This is where I did my dissertation. It's located in this plaza. And it's the central group, and it's the oldest group in the whole archaeological site. It has 3 main plazas. Tulum Plaza, the Ulum Plaza, and King Plaza, and then it has 3 patios, patio B, patio A, and patio C, which is a very complete sort of like group. So this is what it looks like in real life. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about, or what I talk about in my dissertation, was it a royal court? So a royal court is characterized by a ruler. In the Maya area, there's Sahals, there's Sahals, there's Kalotes, and all these different kinds of rulers. And it's difficult in the book because we really don't have any evidence of writing, it's not in Kinuc. So we have all this peripheral evidence to think about, was there a ruler here, or was there not a ruler here? And if there's no ruler, then, what is it then? Because it looks like a court. One way to think about a rule court, which I argue that it is that it's sort of like an administrative policy, right? A polity that dedicated to administer agricultural land without a local royal lineage. So this is what it looks like in drawing. And one of the things that me talking about incremental change, I'm going to go back really quickly to this. So one of the things that I want to point out this is like 6 years of work out of the 10 that we did. So one of the things that you can look at is just by looking at this is that, yeah, it looks like a lot of rocks for sure. You can see the stairs of one structure, you can see a Mikota. There's a building here that is completely full of rocks and covered. There's another building here that's also covered by rocks. So there's a lot of things happening.
Are there recommended carvings that on those steps? Carvings?
No, we number them when people are going to consolidate them. So we know which step goes where. But this is what it looks like, right? So this is more clear. There's a building here. There's another building here. There's a little platform there, another building here, and there's another little platform here. So it's incremental change. One of the things then that we did, if we wanted to understand the site through this structure, is that the project basically dissected it. They made a 4x4 test pit that went from the bottom all the way down. So there's supposed to be something in the background, but this is a little bit, it's washing it out. But basically what we did then, going back to your initial question, is we did a test pit in the middle of the plaza that gave us 6 floors. And we used that as a control sample to be able to figure out, okay, so we know the chronology from the plaza. Then how does that compare to the pyramid? And so we did a 4x4. This took so long time, such a long time. And I coded it, but basically this is what we find. We found that there was a middle classic component here, a late classic, and then boom, they just filled everything up. And then there's a Terra classic. So what we found in a nutshell, I'm going to go really quickly through some of the results, is what does that mean? Is that this site in Kinuc, from the perspective of the pyramid, we found that it goes all the way back to the Milford Classic. In fact, George Bay thinks that people were there creating ceramic pots all the way since 900 BC, or even before, right? Milford Classic. So one of the things that we found, or we can conclude that we found, is that there were 2 platforms over here, and in this platform there were 2 structures on top. And this is sort of like the window that we have. You can see that, again, it's kind of washed up, but you can see that there's rocks over here that tell us that there was a platform here. And we carbon dated this to this date, 600 BC. But what's really interesting is we also found on that's north in the west section of Bayikim. Now this is not what we found, but it's an example. We found evidence of the basis of apsidal structures. Apsidal structures are this sort of like, they're in the form of an egg, and they are traditional Maya, the base for traditional Maya housing. We found that all the way there. This is actually excavated in Belize by archaeologists, and you can see that there's a alignment of rocks there that is going to create an apsidal structure. So this is what it would look like in modern times, right? It's like 1,000-year-old, thousands of years of technology. So there was a bunch of houses over there, but there were a couple of plazas here. So a lot of things were happening in the pre-classic, but they were not happening in Kinuc. You have all this, in sites like Shogunake, you have, for example, in terms of architectural styles, you have like big buildings and temples and acropolis with what you call megalithic structures, which are about yay big, this thick, right? This great sort of like effort to create really enormous acropolis. We did not have that in Kinuc. Going back to, for example, astrology, looking at the stars and whatnot, usually in the pre-classic we have these things called E-groups, which is this really long platform that has 3 buildings in the middle and the sides, and then it's looking at another platform. And the idea is that, and they're also looking at the east. So the idea is that you can measure the solstice and the other equivalent, which I'm blanking on right now, of course, through those buildings. You can look at the movement of the sun as it goes. We don't have anything like that. Equinox, thank you. We don't have anything like that. We just have what looks like is it's a village, a small village that lasted for a long, long time, right? They were able to take care of the land, they were able to harvest water from the rain and all that stuff, but they weren't really building a lot of stuff in the past.
What would you say would be the population of,
A few weeks.
maybe at its height, I'm sure?
I hesitate to say a number because population is the hardest thing to calculate in archaeology. There's methods to calculate it by, for example, looking at all the buildings, looking at all the rooms, and you can say, well, the families were about 8 people, and everybody, every room has 5 people, then we can get a number. But the reality is that not every building is occupied at the same time. Some buildings are abandoned, or some buildings are used for storage and not really for, so it's really hard to figure it out. I mean, I can't say. But it's a significant, that's why I'm calling it a village. It's just a small village of people that, I would say about 1,000 people maybe. Yeah, maybe less. Maybe less, 800.
Some people.
So this is archaeologist Tomás Gallareta. He's in charge of the project. But it's really hard to say. Not a lot of people. This was just a group of villages that were able to harness the land and make it work for them. The agriculture is great. There's no water that made it work for them for a long, long time.
Well, and my real question was, based on the environmental conditions, how many people really could be sustained given the harshness of the climate or multiple factors. And that's what I was really thinking. It would always, the population would always be limited
Yes.
to how many people could be sustained in a healthy way.
Yeah, they call it the carrying capacity. So it's really hard to come up again with a specific number. But what I can say is that it really depends on the rain in the case of Kinuc. There's a lake near, I think it's in Quintana Roo technically, right? It's in the south of Mexico, of Yucatan, and it's called Lake Potosí, I think is what it's called. It's a lake. And what they did is they did a core. They basically grabbed a tube and just grabbed a core from the bottom of the lake, yanked it out, and you can see how dry or how wet a year was. And you can compare it also to trees. The tree rings will tell you if it was really dry, or like tiny little rings in the core, or they're really thick, right? There was a lot of water. So we know that there's a bunch of droughts, especially in the Lake Classic, but at this point, it's wet. I mean, it's constant. As far as the evidence shows, there are resources, and there's not a lot of people, so not a lot of people are fighting.
So it was continuous observation,
We
correct?
think so. Yeah.
So because of continuous population, it has to do with what time you want to talk about population. So the population is going to get good when the weather is good, and it's going to go down when the weather is bad. And so the population is, who knows?
Yeah.
It could be any number.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, and sometimes, we have reported, for example, there's a town by Ushkutska called I think it's the one that there's a old folk there who told me that when he was a kid, there was this not drought, but there was what is it called, locusts, those bugs, locusts.
They still go there.
Well, they destroyed all their crops, and there was nothing. So a lot of people just left the town. And he stayed there, and he would tell me that he ate basically the bark of the trees, he would make tea out of it. And he stayed, he didn't want to leave. And then after the drought season ended a couple of years later, all the people came back. So you're right, it's just this fluctuation of people that are coming and going, right? Where they can. Right, so really quickly, but what we see then is that in the early classic or classic period, that's about 400 and 8400. We have these patches in all the test pits that were excavated. We call them in La Hala, but it's basically a pavement. And the pavement really marks the change between the pre-classic and the classic. In other words, it marks the difference between having a small village and then this construction boom in the site. It really does mark it. To us, it tells us that something happened that people were just like, we're starting to build here. You know, it could be anything. It could be money or it could be politics, but people really had a plan to start building. And this is what, okay, good. So this is what the lower part of the pyramid looks like. And I'm going to talk about it really quickly. But basically what we have is that they created this really big platform that was really basically very similar to the platform in front. So this is to say that they are creating a project in line in the middle of this place as they're going during the classic. They're all square stones. They all have the different things. And then a little bit afterwards, what we know is that Mayan people thought that their objects were alive. This is going back to the idea of hybrids, right? We have a different relationship with our objects. We tend to replace them all the time. You know, you have an Apple, an iPhone that's iPhone 12, and then you use it for 2 years, and then 13 comes out, you replace it, or you break it and you replace it. You know, you have some jeans, and then you go to Walmart, get another jeans or whatever. But back in the day, like a vessel could be like a heirloom that will last generation to generation to generation. It's like crafted, handmade by a specific person, and that can be really powerful. So for some people, it's so powerful they actually have to kill the object. This happens all over the Americas. So what you'll have in ceramics right now, for example, is you have ceramics that have a little hole in the middle. We call it a kill hole in burials, for example. It means that they're not only the owner dies, but also the objects of the owner also have to be killed because they're bad juju. They're just that powerful. A way that I think about objects that are powerful. Let's think about, for example, the crown jewels, or the crown of the monarch that just died, one of the queens. So you know that a crown is just forged metal with rocks on top, pretty rare rocks, I mean short, you know, and it has this puffy things and you can put it on and whatnot, and you know that it's an object. There's nothing really special about it. But I dare anybody to grab it and put it on their head. I mean, that's bad juju all around because it doesn't belong there, right? So objects can be really powerful, right? They can have that aura. And the same thing can be for really big objects like platforms. So we have evidence there. This is not a post hole or anything. Someone actually dug something and burned in the inside of the structure. We know that they burned that initial platform that we have, which is this platform here. Someone just burned it, killed it, destroyed it in the inside. And then on the outside, what we have is that this is sort of like a mystery Kinuc. We have evidence that there were multiple individuals. Cecilia Medina from Wadi here analyzed. We started excavating, found a lot of burials. I didn't show the bones, but I'm going to show the drawings. They were very burned. This is sort of like what it would remain. There were about 2 or 3 adults, and they were possibly male, and they were buried face down. And we know that from the pattern of the burn of the bones, right? They were burned face down, they were articulated, and they were burned, they were in situ, which means they were in place. So they burned them in an open fire, we think. And then they burned them, and then they sort of like buried them again. They broke 3 floors, burned them, buried them, and put another floor on top of them. And we know that because from the traces of fire in the bones, the soup, you can figure out which position the individual was. You can figure out also how hot it was. And we know that from an open fire, you can only get so hot. You will have to be a close fire for it to get really like more than 1,000 degrees or something like that, right? So we know it's between 300 and 600 Celsius that they were put into bedrock. So we don't know what this is. There wasn't any evidence of foul play or cut marks or violence, but we know that after these individuals were burned and covered, the gesture group got revitalized. Now we have these two structures that I showed you in the beginning. You can see them here from all two angles. So we have this one, so we have evidence of one wall of this building and that was all the way back in the pyramid. But then in the gesture group, you have this renovation of the landscape. You have multiple vaulted buildings now. The other thing that's interesting is that now you have formalized spaces. So in other words, now you have your administrative area, your residential, your ceremonial area, your kitchen, and your residential area. And you may ask, how do you know that? Well, we know that in a nutshell because this is a temple that was also burned multiple times with stelas here. The stelas had no carvings. They were just blank stelas that were really tall. We know that this was a residential area because there's chultun. There's a couple of chultuns here that are associated with water, that are residential. We think that that's a kitchen. There's another structure we think is a kitchen. And we know that this is an administrative area because this structure over here, which we're going to talk about in a second, is what George Bay calls a popolna, or a council house, right? It's characterized by having benches and having entrances when people, he compared it to other sites, like for example, there's one in Copan, there's one in Ekbalam, and apparently they are for taking care of businesses, right? They have multiple benches, and they're usually elongated, and they're usually in front of a pyramid. The other thing that's really interesting about this is that all these buildings are they're not looking inward, they're looking outward, so it's almost like a panopticon, right? They're always like looking around. So this main residential building is looking at the residential area, this building is looking at the ceremonial area, and then where we think the royal court was, is looking at the administrative area.
So there's no ball court?
No, we don't have any ball court. And more interesting, what I think is a rule court is that we don't have any ball court, we don't have any e-groups, we don't have a royal burial either. I don't know if you've catched that from the cut, or we didn't, or the archaeology gods didn't favor us and we didn't hit it. But we dissected it, and we didn't find it, and no evidence is evidence, right? So we don't have a royal, typically in my area, in my culture, we will have individuals, royal burials that are placed under eastern structures or under pyramids, and then that becomes the center of the city, and then you build on top of it. You don't have that at all. We didn't have maybe anything before the age. Another evidence that we have is we have that then there's another killing of the structure, and it gets represented by bird ceramic artifacts. So we think that they dismantle it, and then they create this immense building that you see there, which was a temple. So we think that when this happened, the group that you saw there that's called Shea was no longer relevant. In other words, the center of the city switched from that group to another group to the west. That's called Ushe, which we're going to talk about briefly. And in fact, it got renovated again to transform into this enormous temple that we see right there. Let me see if I can find that. No, I don't find it. I'll show it to you later. But there's this enormous temple that we find. We didn't have any burials at all, which makes us think about royalty. The only sort of like evidence of royalty that we have, but this is sort of like parallel evidence or peripheral evidence, has to do with mat signs that we find in the corners of the temple. So mat signs are sort of like this pattern that we have here. You see it in Lamna, you see it in Ekbalam, in all those other places, and there are signs of royalty. Whenever you see a mat sign, it means that there's some royal individual that's happening. And that's a new thing that happened during the terminal plastic. So now we have signs of royalty on the side. We don't have a lot of iconography, but now we have stucco broken stucco pieces that represent as an individual, right? That was part of the facade. And again, one of those mysteries that archaeology leads us is that in the last construction phase of this building, on the top there was this bench, altar. I call it a throne once, but my advisor said, don't call it a throne. It has baggage, okay. So I call it an altar. But one of the things that's really interesting is that, I don't know if you can tell, it's looted. It was looted, and it was looted in the past. So we found, so you see square rock, square rock, square rock, and then you have this rock, and then you have this square rock over here. So it looks like someone yanked that, threw it out there, took whatever out, and then didn't bother to put it back, just like, put it back up there. So that's one of the mysteries of archaeology for you guys. And underneath that, just to make it more like spicy, this is sculpture of a skull. So we don't really know, so that's the lower mandible of the skull. There's the teeth.
It's an effigy?
Huh?
It's an effigy of a skull or a skull?
No, it's made of rock.
Okay.
This is a rock. It's a sculpture of a rock, of a skull. So we don't know what it is. We know that there's burned parts over here too. So what is the point of all this? The point of all this is that I really, with Brad and with all the investigation that we're doing, we're starting to understand that not all pyramids were royal and not everything was about kings. It was about actual people that were trying to adapt to the environment, walk with the loud water that they have, organize themselves. Not every pyramid is about a king. And authority is not always about this, about power. Or it is about power, but that authority is not always about this great king that governs everything. We see this, I think it's pretty unique that we see how a group of people organize themselves from really 800 BC to all the way to 900 AD. And there's more that I didn't say, of course. There's just so much stuff happening. But there's all these other things that we have all over in terms of ceremonial deposits all over the pyramid, including that one another sort of like archaeology mystery that we don't know how to explain, or I don't know how to explain. In the back of the kitchen, the royal kitchen down there, we found, it's called a lip-to-lip cache. So it's a pot that has another pot on the top, and inside that pot there was a burial of an infant, and the infant had like this necklace that had a jade bead. So it's clearly someone that's really high ranked, but what is it doing in the bird in the back of the kitchen? I mean, that's a story for someone to write about, but I don't really know what that is. So there's a lot of things happening in all of this structure, this pyramid. Finally, what we think happened is that during the Terminal Classic, with the rise of Uxmal and all the Chichen and all these places, power got accumulated, got administrated in a different way. It was not only about little centers. So what I told you about the Popolna, which was a small sort of like local council house, those became completely irrelevant. So now you have, they call them Nohochnas, which an example of that would be structure 44 of Civil too. So it's not this little council house. Now it's this enormous thing, more regional, more people will go into there to discuss that's true. And then we go from here, which is where we were. The current investigations that we are going to explore this are to the west. It's the AC. They're moved to the west. One of the things that they are arguing from their excavations is that this is another pyramid. It's not a pyramid that I explained before, but this pyramid that has 3 rooms, 1, 2, and 1 on the top. George Bays, the main person in charge of this project, is arguing that it's actually a throne room. So his hypothesis is that even though we didn't have royalty at the beginning, for most of the site, probably there's a king or a house or someone of high importance in this building. And that's one of the things that they are doing right now, doing research. I mean, some future research that I want to do at some point has to do with water. This is just some preliminary research, preliminary results we grabbed from a bunch of places. The amount of jars that we found there's a lot of jars in all these places. And it makes sense that people are using water they're storing water. We all have garrafones in our kitchens, right, of purified water. So these people will just have them in their sites. Specifically this shape, which is called a basin, which we don't see in Belize or really in Honduras. So there's really big sort of like water containers that are in the corners of their houses. People used to use them like 100 years ago. Okay. So finally, I just wanted to say that, I mean, this is a project that I have, but it's not, I'm just part of the team. There's many more questions that people are asking, many different things that people are trying to do of this really ongoing project. And if you guys, this is just from where we got the money from basically. And another thing is that if you guys want to visit the place at Kinuc, we have a laboratory basically in Ushkuska that's called M Park, right? Where there's places, there's little casitas where you can stay with AC, that you can use as a middle ground or as a base start point where you can go and see all the sites in the pools. And those are, you just need to email them and reserve them. But if you are interested in those things happen. There's beds, there's hammocks, there's a pool. So if you're interested in those, this is the place where you go and find. You can also just look at Kinuc on the internet. If you want any of what I've written about, Belize or otherwise, you can Google my name, or you can use that QR code there, and it'll send you to my webpage that has all the articles, recent articles that I've published. If you want anything about it, if you want anything about Kinuc or otherwise, and that's it. That's all I got for you. Do you guys have any questions, comments?
See? So, in order to machine these stones, you need stones that are harder than the ones you machine on.
Yes.
And so, my question is, I wonder where they came from. Because even now, when you walk around here, there are stones everywhere, but obviously points, axes for knocking down trees so you can make a line, weapons.
What I can say is that there's this concept in anthropology called local ecological knowledge. So what that means is that when you look at the landscape, I mean, if I walk through the landscape and see trees, I just sort of like look at, and I see them as sort of like generic jungle trees, right? They don't mean anything to me. But for people that are agriculturalists, that they live from the landscape, this tree is a medicine tree. This tree is a heart tree. This tree is, so they're looking at it as resources. The same thing is with stone. They look at different stones or different outcrops, and they're saying, well, this is for this is for nothing, this is for flintstone, or this is a possible quarry that I can use. And we find those quarries in the landscape all the time. They're a little bit dirty, a little bit outcrop, but as you clean them, you can still see the chop, like
Machine marks.
the
Machine marks.
yeah, the cutting marks with other rocks,
Right.
denser rocks.
Yeah, this reflecting the Mayan language. So, for example, we call it limestone, and that's basically what the Maya have like 8 different terms for distinguishing different types of limestone. Okay, it's like ask here in Yucatan, a Yucatec about snow. And we just call it snow, but we know that if you live in the north, you know at least 10 different names for different types of
In
snow.
Alaska, there are 30 different names
So
for snow.
does it make sense? And second, it is that they have been doing some experimentation with tools. So for example, using church and so on. But they don't work. They lose the cutting edge very quickly. So it seems that they were using different types of stone, the same limestone, and for packing more than cutting.
Right.
Say. So yes, I mean, but we still don't know much about the ancient Mayan technology.
One of the things that, I'm a carpenter from the United States. And so, the first question in my mind is how did they take stones and machine stones in such fine relief? It's unbelievable to me how beautiful it is, and yet,
A little,
who made these tools? Who made these tools?
a little bit of geology maybe can help. You know, like limestone is formed by microorganisms that, I mean, everything was under the water here in the peninsula, you know. And so these limestones or shells collapse or die, and sometimes changes in temperature make them precipitate to the bottom in layers. And so the Maya knew about these layers, and they can isolate them, so they don't need too much work in order to get a flat surface. But they can use abrasives like sand or something, or so. And also, besides fire, they were using wedges, wooden wedges, for some kind of limestone can be called as ice. So you can see, you know, like you can see some striations.
Right.
So they could follow them up, make a little hole, put it a wedge, a wooden wedge with water, and when it expands, you get a crack that it makes. So it's, but I mean,
A lot of work.
a lot of work and a lot of time to realize, you know, this type of, I mean, it's really hard to distinguish.
Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to also add to that is that what a lot of things you see in Maya archaeology is that if you see really old or really early buildings, all the rocks are perfectly square and they're really nice and whatnot, but as you go later in time, those really big buildings, you can tell that they're recycling rocks also because they're so expensive to do. Like in this example, I mean, you can tell that, I mean, this was all covered with stucco at some points and with stairs, but you can tell that they're recycling rocks and they're just wedging it however they can. Like, these rocks are pretty nice, oh, this one's not so much and whatnot, right? So it is expensive. And one of the things about the poop that's really interesting is that those guys were master stone makers. I mean, in fact, there's theories about, so Evan Parker, who was another person from the project, and Stephanie Sims excavated this residential group on a hill. And one of the theories that they pointed out was that those might be, this really elite, like really nice house on the hill, right? The guy who lived there were a bunch of, they thought he was a mason, a master mason, right? So this guy who was like basically an architect that knows how to work, has all the knowledge, knows where to work. So people were really, it was a really high skilled labor, right? Yes?
So, I noticed your correct is south of Labna. So
Yes.
I wondered, and then Sayo and Gabay, if there's stylistically anything similar in Korea to
There-
those places?
They're actually very similar. They all have stylistically different, right? Kaba is very particular because it has all those masks, and how the chalk noses, and how they call spot, and all those things that are spectacular. So in terms of the detailed identity, I mean, every city has its own personality and identity. I mean, Labna has a really huge Sakbe, it has all those other things, but in general, it's the same idea. You have groups, residential, ceremonial compartments that are united by a sakbe. All those different sort of like mental templates of what the city should look like. It's very similar, but particular cities have particular identities and particular ideas. So even though those elements are there, Kaba has its own signature things. Labna has its arches. Kinuc has its other things happening there. So yes, there are similarities, but in general, the template is the same, right? It's like comparing. I mean, not that they're that big. It's not like Chicago, New York, but you know, it's maybe like I don't know, Jacksonville, and, I don't know, Columbus or something. You know, that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did you find for the mapping Sackville roads in Kinuc?
Did you read? No. There is one internal segment that connects the old section of Kinuc with the new section. So the old section would be the one that I just talked about, and the new section is the one that George Bates explained. They are connected by a segment, and we think that there's processions, and it's a way of connecting the past to the present. So it's a political sort of like move there. But we have not identified this outside of that. There's with this new technology that I'm sure you've heard about, that's called LiDAR, which is basically this military technology that now our brothers are using, in which a drone or a plane passes and the laser just maps everything on the ground. It's great because you can take out in a computer the canopy, which was the problem with satellite imagery from the get-go. And it's really sub-millimeter. It's really, really precise. So with those, you were able to, our guns are starting to be able to identify a lot of roads and a lot of internal and external everywhere, but not unique. We have not, that I'm aware of, identified any formal roads. You can do this thing on the software called the nearest path route, which would calculate based on the altitude and the terrain, probably what a simulation of what people would go and where they would walk, but you would have to go in ground truth. And that is, once you have the simulation, you would have to go and see if it's actually true or if you can find anything, you know, that indicates that it was a road, a formal road. Because the other thing, you know, is that going back to that story of that guy who told me that there was a dry season where all the town left. He was also telling me of how back in the day he would go to a stop walking, and he would take a back road basically that would take him. It would take him one day to go, half a day to go to a shoe stop. It would be a couple of hours to buy stuff and they come back. And that road ended up in La Ermita in Chuscab, which is a traveler's church. So this is just to say that there's probably a ton of informal roads. And I bet that if you have the LiDAR, you can see those roads still, right? Hundreds of years of people walking on those informal roads. So I think there's probably a lot of informal roads that we haven't seen in the Buk and Bolchin region with all those hills. But in terms of external formals like this, I mean, just not in Kiwi. We have not found.
So are you using LiDAR in your site, the site that you're working on?
Yeah, Bill Ringel and Tomás Gallareta and George Bay were able to get an NSF, and they use LiDAR. I think it was a little bit pre-pandemic, and they have been chipping at it little by little. This is what people say with LiDAR, right? That you can see a lot of detail, you can see a lot of that image here that you couldn't see before, and it looks like, and a lot of urban patterns that we didn't see before are happening, are you can see. So for example, you can see in the LiDAR how there are patches of really dense activity, and then there's patches where there's nothing. And then there's patches of dense activity again, and then there's nothing. So that tells you about polities, about the extension of towns, and probably can tell you about those areas were probably used for agriculture, right? People were just using the patches. So that's one of the things that we found. This is an example that I didn't use, but so this is a LiDAR image, right? So this is from Kinuc. It's a little blown out, so you can't really tell it. But this is from Vietnam that I borrowed from Tomás Gallareta, like that. But you can clearly see, you know, the structures. If you take out the canopy, even you see lines. That might be people walking or informal roads like this. I bet this is a road, informal road, just by looking at it. So you can see a lot of detail in there. Those holes there, that's probably a chultun, a water cistern. And you can see all these different things if you zoom in. Like that's definitely, you can see the circle there's a chultun, right? The house is chultun. So you can see a lot of things if you zoom in, and you also can see a lot of things if you zoom out. And you look at the general pattern of where people were settling, how they were, and they can tell you a lot about how they were managing the landscape. And again, in terms of, that helps us in terms of carrying capacity, how much were they exploiting the landscape, how much people, etc. But LiDAR is this, it's really a new technology, it's really expensive. Any other questions? The more questions we have, the more we have the AC room. Putting that out there. All right, well, thank you very much. I hope it was interesting. No, it's beauty. This talk and not the box.
All right, y'all. All right, so that is it. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I will see y'all on the next video. You already know what it is. It's rainy, so checking in, checking out without a doubt. Deuces.